Early risers, ready for a tough discussion?
I'm ready.
Hello,
Not sure
Nour.
if everyone is. Hi.
So, Nour Haridy, as Selma just introduced you, you were 19 years old in the US doing your high school studies and decided not to take the usual route of continuing on to university at the time. And now today, 1 year later, you're 20, and you've had an exciting and interesting year working as a developer, and you've also just established your own entity as well. You want to tell us a bit more about that and why you decided not to take the usual uni route?
Yeah. Well, I was planning going to a U.S. university at the time, but the universities that I got into weren't really my favorite, so I just decided to go back. But I actually didn't have any plans, so it's not like I wasn't really into blockchain at that point. I just came back, and I was gonna have a gap here, and then I just happened to have absolutely nothing to do except for blockchain. So yeah, I mean, that was pretty much it. But then, you know, worked a little bit remotely for a couple projects. Then at some point started LaMarcaz, which is.
So along the way, during high school, you weren't a coder, you weren't really into, how did you know that you were into tech and you really wanted to go that route and actually work a lot more on it?
Yeah, I've been a developer for a while. I've been a developer for about 4 years before, but I wasn't like a professional developer in the sense of work experience, right? I developed like plenty of personal projects, just playing around as a full stack web developer, not as a blockchain developer or anything else. Also, I had some interest in cybersecurity in the last year of high school, and that was where don't laugh. That was where the interest in blockchain came, because there's a lot of overlapping between the two fields.
So you were working as a developer, and
Yes.
you hooked up with a company in the Netherlands. You want to tell us a bit about your work there, or do you want to?
No, yeah, I've been working with Tycoon, with Evan, for instance, but that was fairly recently, for the past 3 months or so. What happened is that I was working for other ICOs before as a smart contract developer and developing the ICO and token contracts on Ethereum. But then I started LaMarcaz in September, and we've been working on our own R&D projects. Then 3 months ago, we were approached by Tycoon in the Netherlands, and we're working on them on identity, attestation, and liquid democracy, and all this kind of fun stuff, I think.
You all do realize that Nour has just finished high school and has not entered university and had any formal university education yet. So we're here with Mr. Genius Haridy. So before we... Our own Egyptian-born, shall we say...
I think the biggest part of it is just that I absolutely had nothing to do for an entire year, which just ends, I think, like this month, my gap year. So that really had like everything to do with it. Like even my friends were were in college or in college at that point. So it's not like I have anything like to do. I think really anything else to do. And at the same time, it was really the rise of blockchain, right? So it's really hard to ignore, for developers specifically.
So we'll get more into detail on your work with LaMarcaz and Tycoon, but let's just take a step back and talk about, you know, blockchain 101. So let's just say, what is blockchain and how is it useful?
So there are really multiple ways of defining, in my opinion, what a blockchain is. It's not really one thing. It's multiple, so it's kind of like a clock, for instance. A lot of people don't see it that way. It's a way to basically move in time. So blocks represent time, for instance, but instead of maybe seconds or minutes. Or it's a ledger for money, or it's a database for applications, or it can be a lot of things. It can be also back-end using smart contracts. So there are many ways of defining it, but the most intrinsic aspect of it is the decentralized, trustless feature, which is the fact that you don't have to trust anyone, especially you don't have to trust the center to do things on your behalf, like you do with banks online, or to trust them to tell you information about the information that you want to know, like banks do, for instance, when they tell you your balance. And what is it useful for? I think in its current form, nothing.
It's enabling of resources.
Well, I think
it's peer-to-peer.
yes. No, these features exist, but what is it actually useful for now? Absolutely nothing. Not even money. I think, like blockchain as it is right now is just totally sucks, and I think it just requires a lot of work, but it will get there. But I think people are a little too early on applying it on things now.
So what comes to people's minds is who owns blockchain. So like the internet, for example, a lot of people had to work on it along the way and gradually developed into internet. But in our minds, it's associated with Tim Berners-Lee, who launched www. So some people associate blockchain with Nakamoto, even though it's unknown, but the name is associated as he was the first to launch the Bitcoin. You want to tell us your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think it's going to be probably a very similar scenario to Web 2.0, or the web in general, with the blockchain. We're going to have this kind of inspirational figure as an inventor, but not really. They won't really have any, as in Satoshi, but they won't really have any like effect. They don't already have any effect on technology or the community. But then it's a really good comparison actually, because because a lot of people think of blockchain as one component in what's called Web 3.0, which is the third generation of the web, including decentralized storage, blockchain as a decentralized database, and a back end, and a couple other things like decentralized chat, peer-to-peer chat. So, but the best part of it is that just like the web, when it was created a long time ago, in the 90s, I think, it was meant to be decentralized, but this is the second layer of decentralization, where we decentralize also decision-making and ownership and a lot of other things, while the last generation is about decentralizing just the paths to the servers, but the servers are centralized. But it also goes a lot beyond, in my opinion, it goes a lot beyond just internet and communications and apps. It will also most definitely get into governance and politics and society and obviously fundraising at this point.
It being a ledger and a record, so what type
society.
Of records, for example, medical records, documentation, let's think of all the types of records that could be recorded.
Yeah, these can be the most obvious cases for us now, because of also the limitation of this technology as is. So it makes sense to put medical records, makes sense to put government records and all kinds of records, but at some point, blockchains are going to get so good, just like computers have become. Like, we're at the mainframe stage of blockchains. Blockchains are going to get so much better. The use cases we're talking about now are going to look like we were trying to create computers to have electronic calculators, and now we have video games. So it's going to be way more advanced. We're going to have way more complex, decentralized systems, and everything we're doing now is going to look like toys compared to the next stuff. So that's why we in LaMarcaz, for instance, don't work on applications. We don't provide solutions. We don't work with clients at the moment. For the last 8 months, and probably for a couple more years at least, we're going to be working on making this technology better, because we believe it's way too early. This is way too immature. No one should really, in my opinion, in most cases, if you're a company and somebody goes to you telling you, hey, we have a blockchain solution to you, you should be extremely skeptical. That's my opinion. But yeah.
So yeah, going on to skepticism, you do realize that, of course, there's a lot of skepticism associated with blockchain and blockchain technology and cryptocurrency. So, I mean, even to the point that people fear or associated with the Ponzi scheme of the early 20th century in the US, gambling, mismanagement, financial corruption, tax evasion. There's all that. So how do we balance the good and the usefulness of the technology? And what you're trying to do at LaMarcaz, for example, getting all developers together to improve the technology. How do you see, or how would you answer? What is your opinion on that?
Well, the way I look at the development of our work, our development work is like, we look at them like roads, for instance. We develop roads, and they're agnostic to whoever walks over them or what car goes over them, right? Some cars can go to transfer goods, they can be used for trade, it can be used to carry someone to a hospital faster, or it can also be used by criminals. So it's really, in our eyes as developers, it's usually agnostic, but that doesn't mean that there can't be regulation. The question is whether it's going to be industrial regulation, as in the industry, like us right here in this conference, for instance, together. And in other instances, we could set together the industry regulations for it. Or are we going to leave it to the politicians? I think the best way to do it is by those who know it the best. So if we create this kind of regulation, the politicians won't have to, right? And there can be regulations. There can be regulations that don't harm the technology too much, but at the same time, just put some safeguards out there. So for instance, I think the first step here in Egypt is that we need to look at how we can have clear guidelines and regulations for dealing with cryptocurrencies, because otherwise it is going on. Like, there are huge transactions of cryptocurrency around the country happening. Everyone knows it, but I mean, everyone in the industry, in the blockchain
in
industry.
2011, the prices were, very, just moved from 30 to 32.
Right.
And then 7 years later, it's into the 19,000, but then it went down halfway. So
yes.
it's
So volatility is a huge problem, but I think it's only a temporary problem that actually will solve itself if blockchain gets to widespread adoption. The problem is purely purely financial, and it's basically because the market cap is very low relatively. People think Bitcoin price at $20,000 is huge, and it actually isn't. It's just a trick. It's a psychological trick, because the Bitcoin, for instance, just Bitcoin, but the Bitcoin supply is very small. It's 21 million. So the market cap is divided by the supply and gives this huge, four-figure number, which just scares people away. But that's if we actually reach, for instance, the gold market cap for cryptocurrencies is going to be at least about 400,000 or something. So at that kind of market cap, and also at the kind of point where we have widespread adoption, people using cryptocurrencies in everyday life, buying coffee, and that will require solving all of the problems that there are now. But if we reach that, most money will be in circulation. The money that is being speculated will be very little compared to it, just like fiat. I mean, people speculate with US dollars, but you don't see the US dollar value going up and down like Bitcoin. But so when we have that kind of circulation, where over 99% of Bitcoins are being circulated between normal people, not speculators, you're going to have no volatility, no volatility you can notice, or that will even affect you in day-to-day life, just like US dollars.
Well, like you were saying, there needs to be a lot of work done on regulation, or some thoughts on how to improve the regulation in the industry, to avoid things like double spending and the fluctuation and what's going on. I mean, some have such fears. So although the technology over time has improved dealings and payments and improved and made things faster and easier, there are a lot that still needs to be worked on. And in some countries, there are fears enough that central banks have totally stopped and prohibited dealings in the crypto, like China, India, South Korea, Kenya, Pakistan. So probably since there's still some gray areas and people still need to work on
but also
a lot of that.
That has happened with a lot of other technologies until they reach widespread adoption, and all of this just reverses. Like this kind of, I think this happened with the internet in a way here in Egypt, but not officially. There was this fear of the internet when it came in. People were like, this is going to be just horrible for security. We can't secure ourselves. Also, encryption wasn't a thing back then. It wasn't that widely used back then. So everyone was by default exposed to all kinds of things that are similar to the problems we have here. But they're all solved now. We're in the internet's widespread adoption era. And we're going to reach that era in blockchain in the near future. And everyone who's trying to avoid it, including governments, will be at some point forced to reverse these actions in order to be able to transact with the rest of the world.
So taking a step further into the actual use and being submerged in the industry, so the usual for startups is to try to get funding for their projects, and they resort to angel investors, VCs, but oftentimes that means giving up a share of equity, and people want to hold on to the ownership of their projects. And so there's that area where people feel a bit stuck. And so with ICOs, there's a new route or a new way out or a different channel for that. People are now not. So how does it work? So investors pay Bitcoin or Ethereum or any one of the 1,400 that are existing out there, and you get crypto coins. How has that helped you at LaMarkaz? You had invested some in crypto, and that helped you establish your own organization. You want to tell us about your experience in that and how people can go the same way?
Right, so LaMarcaz is completely self-funded at the moment, and it's funded from investments made earlier before, like when I was in high school, before I came back, and before all the crypto rally as well. But I think this is all like speculation, but I think the real benefit, the real benefit to here specifically, like this place, this country, is really, something we're really missing on is the $4 billion ICO industry. Actually, just last year, I think, $4 billion. We got zero out of that last year, which is horrible, in my opinion, because there's so much opportunity. There are people literally, there's a craze, there's a blockchain, there's an ICO craze, and there are some really good tech companies here that have absolutely no idea of that. I did actually speak to a few companies here in this conference from the Shark Zone pitches, and their projects would be really good if they would have if they would have a token, and they could also ICO, which would allow them funding to scale up a lot further. But they didn't know. They were also very surprised, and they were very interested when they knew about it. I think there's a huge potential for companies here, tech companies in particular, to enter the ICO market now before it's too late. Because at this point, it's completely okay in the global ICO market to play around and experiment with something new and something that's untested or unproven. But at some point, when blockchain matures, this is not going to happen. This is just like the dot-com bubble, I think a couple decades ago, when everybody was playing around, everybody was making new companies, like internet companies, and all of a sudden it all bursts, and just like the top few make it after, but then it's not the same anymore. You can't just go around and play around after the bubble. We could be in a bubble, but if it bursts, those who were there before and created sustainable projects will continue. But if you come after and try to create sustainable projects, it's going to be a lot more challenging. But anyway, you were asking about LaMarcaz and the ICOing. We are actually so we have this project called D-Court, and it's a dispute arbitration blockchain system. It's just a system to solve conflicts on the blockchain. We are thinking of ICOing, but we don't know the guidelines. There are no guidelines. There's no way that is set for us on how to deal in crypto if we want. Because if you're ICOing, you have to receive ethers or Bitcoin in terms of funding. You don't receive fiat. And we want to go through the system. We don't want to do, we can't as a company, we need ways to pay taxes in crypto. We need ways to go through all the securities regulators and the AML regulations. These all don't apply to us. We can't just improvise and all of a sudden find out that we have broken taxation laws or anti-money laundering laws or securities laws. There has to be clear guidance from the regulators for us and others who are here and are going to come to the industry to operate. Otherwise, we will be forced to change jurisdictions, which we are, definitely have to consider, which I really would not do if it was up to me. I really prefer staying here.
So let's continue a bit more on LaMarcaz and what are your hopes for this organization? You're trying to get together all developers and into a hub or an area where you could work together to do what? To improve dApps development, to give us a bit more idea about what you want to do, what you envision.
So the point from LaMarkaz and the whole mission is that we're trying to help accelerate widespread adoption by also helping solve some of its most difficult problems, like scalability, for instance. We do have some sharding research, which is about scaling blockchains. Also, Decode is one of our research projects, but we don't create apps, as I said earlier. The point is that we think blockchains are immature. We try and create the next generation infrastructure for blockchains, but we don't create the apps yet because we think the current systems are, as I said, like the mainframes before PCs, and if we try to create applications on top of these mainframes will go outdated, and so our applications. But yes, so that's the point from our work. It's pure infrastructure research and development, but it's not non-profit. There is a token model behind every project. There's also MauHub, and MauHub is a partnership between LaMarcaz and Tyken in the Netherlands and other partners to create an educational blockchain hub in Cairo. We're working on that now with many partners here in Egypt and abroad. And the point is that there's a worldwide developer shortage. I think up to 60% shortage in terms of blockchain developers. There are huge needs, and there is absolutely the offerings are just completely a lot lower. And the point is, from what we're doing, is Egypt has a relatively lower cost of living, cost of business. And this gives Egypt an advantage in terms of business and in terms of talent. So if we set up a hub here, we can have projects come to Egypt, set their teams here, get developers from here, which would give them an advantage over other competitors, and also potentially creating a little talent hub, blockchain talent hub here in the country. And this means this hub, this talent hub, this community can also lead other infrastructure projects together, other applications together. So we kind of trying to create something like the Crypto Valley in Zug, Switzerland. They have this just entire area of blockchain companies, including Ethereum Foundation, for instance, and others. And it's because Switzerland is so good in terms of crypto regulations, it's very good in terms of business. So that's the problem. In order to have this kind of hub, we also need regulations to cooperate. We need to work with regulations, but we also need them to work with us and have an open mind to what we do.
So you, taking a step further, you mentioned LaMarcaz and Tyken, and the whole idea of blockchain technology is that it's a decentralized distributed record or database, and that everything that's recorded is there forever. It can't be changed. It's immutable. It's also complicated. So I want to just take a step into the idea of, for example, the EU law for right to be forgotten. And since we're here at a conscious tech conference, and we want to tie in the idea of tech and consciousness, and so how do you see that happening? Or so I mean, once there's a record, you can't change it. And how does that, in terms of implementation, with regard to this topic?
Yeah, I think the idea of not being able to, I mean, the idea of immutability was kind of there on the internet even before
Almost
blockchain.
impossible, right?
Yeah, but now on the blockchains, so it was, earlier it was, it's very difficult to delete information once it's spread on the internet. Now it's impossible, right, on blockchains. So the point is, yeah, but at the same time, there are privacy tools, there are privacy cryptographic kind of toys where we can actually keep things private because they will be encrypted while they're available to everyone to read, but they're gibberish to everyone, because, so no one can understand them except for those who are meant to understand them. So we have privacy tools. But I think, on the other hand, blockchain is a great tool for privacy and for self-sovereignty, and independent, and a lot of other things that I think central systems miss. So transparency, for instance. We had these scandals lately, like the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where a central provider owning almost everyone's information can just, because of just a little negligence, leak tens of millions of people's data. This kind of thing we could completely prevent using tools like blockchain and cryptography. So I think in that regard, in terms of privacy and self-sovereignty and transparency, blockchain technology can give us a lot better features than current centralized systems, which is what makes them so competitive and so shiny.
So could you elaborate further on how this could help the refugees, and how the systemization and the documentation and identification, how does that tie in with what you were just explaining?
Say again, sorry.
Refugees?
Oh, yeah, so one of the use cases of blockchains, yeah, so one of the use cases of blockchains is identity management and attestation. And this is one of the things I'm working on with Tycoon. I mean, this is what we call the ANA system. And we're trying to create this kind of democratic system where people around the world can own their own identity attestation system instead of trusting governments to do it. So we're trying to kind of create a new distributed identity democracy, representative democracy, sorry, where people around the globe can control and have leverage over their authority rather than the issuing authority having all the leverage over them and all the power over them. So this is what we work on in ANA, but there are also other features. I mean, there are also other benefits of putting identities on blockchains, and it's that also the idea of self-sovereignty, and it's the idea that users can own their own identities and choose to give information about it to others if they want. Also, the idea that the issuers or authorities cannot take away their identities because it's like an ownership, it's like an object they own, and it's connected to them, it's owned by them.
So I think we're almost over with time, and I really want to thank you for this enlightening discussion. But I think we have time for one question. Anybody keeping time? Do we have time for a question? One question. We'll take one question.
Thanks, Nour. I was interested to hear you mention Switzerland, which I think is along one of the themes with blockchain. It's not limited to any one geography. For example, you don't need to go to Silicon Valley to develop blockchain technologies. And top of mind, China for mining, Switzerland for the sandbox, and of course, as you mentioned, that clustering of blockchain tech companies. What do you see as the vision for Egypt along those lines? What do you think Egypt can position itself for to take advantage of this really nascent industry in its infancy in terms of the comparison to the internet? And I'm not sure if the Central Bank of Egypt has a working group on fintech. If they do,
yes.
have you met with them?
Not them, you know. We met with other regulators, but not this particular group, the fintech working group.
Okay, so then some thoughts on your vision for Egypt in relation to blockchain, please.
Right. So, as I mentioned earlier, I think we have a great advantage over like places like Switzerland, for instance, in terms of cost of business, right? We could have a business advantage over also blockchain studios and companies around the globe, but what we need is, we need to set clear guidelines. But in order to do that, I don't expect the government to do it alone. Like, I don't expect just to pressure the government and keep telling them what we think should be done and expect them to do it. My idea is that we become the first movers. We show them that, we take a little step further, and then we start, with the hub, for instance. That's part of what we're doing. We kind of try and show them success stories. So that's why we want an ICO, for instance. We're trying to find ways to ICO here. We want to show them that ICOs can actually be very useful. Like, crypto can be used for good and can actually benefit the economy here. They've never seen that. You can't pressure them into this stuff without showing them any kind of evidence that they can understand. But if you tell them, hey, look at this and that company, and these companies, and they've raised that amount of money using crypto, but they can't pay taxes here because of your regulations, then they're going to work with you. So this is our approach. We first, as an industry, lead the way, and we expect the regulators to follow. But we can't expect them to follow. We can't expect them to lead the way, as it is with every industry, I believe. This is a possibility here in Egypt, and maybe in other places as well, to actually have an industrial regulator. We could create some sort of an umbrella that lives on the blockchain, that has its own proper funding from the blockchain, can even ICO for it. And all of us, LaMarcaz and other companies here in the industry, could be part of that organization, and they can form industry regulations together, and kind of lead the way, just like how it works in a lot of other industry regulators in other industries. So this is and the idea of using blockchain to do it is actually a possibility. And if other organizations that work in Egypt are interested in this idea, please come talk to us. We'd really be happy to start such an initiative.
Thank you very much, Nour, and we wish you the best of luck with your new endeavors and for enlightening the group on your thoughts on the industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sherine.